Chapter 3, Section 2. The Court's Legitimacy. Because federal judges are appointed rather than elected and serve lifetime tenures, their philosophical legitimacy is sometimes questioned. Their authority is especially likely to be challenged when they issue rulings that impact a controversial political or ideological dispute. For example, following the Supreme Court's decision in Bush v. Gore 2000, many people criticized the majority opinion that halted the recounts in Florida, alleging that the ruling was influenced by partisan bias and that it effectively delivered the presidency to George W. Bush. This concern was reinforced by the observation that the vote to stop the recounts was split along party lines. The 5 justices appointed by Republican presidents voted to end the recount, while the 4 justices appointed by Democratic presidents voted to continue it. Whether valid or not, the criticism of the Supreme Court following Bush v. Gore indicated that public support for its authority was waning. In response, current Chief Justice John Roberts has openly prioritized the depoliticization of the court, promoting consensus among the justices when possible, and attempting to avoid making controversial decisions along party lines. However, this objective also meets with criticism. Some contend that decisions should be made based on the law itself, not to avoid the appearance of partisan bias. Though the results have been mixed, the efforts themselves demonstrate the court's awareness of and attempts to preserve its own legitimacy in the eyes of the public. The role of precedent. One legal doctrine that significantly impacts the legitimacy of the court system is the long-standing tradition of stare decisis, which holds that precedent, once established, should not be reversed except in the most extraordinary circumstances. Adherence to the self-limiting doctrine of stare decisis promotes the stability of the court system. Decisions made are almost always consistent with precedent, and when changes occur, they are often gradual. In this sense, stare decisis can be used to defend the court system's legitimacy, as it demonstrates the judiciary's commitment to consistent, predictable results. However, critics charge that under stare decisis, current and future generations are bound by the rulings of previous jurists, even if they are later judged to be misguided or illogical. For example, the Supreme Court's approval of separate but equal racial segregation in Plessy v. Ferguson 1896 remained the law of the land for nearly 60 years until it was overturned by Brown v. Board of Education 1954. If the court had not chosen to overlook the principle of stare decisis, the decision in Brown v. Board of Education would have been to continue to support segregation. Today, many opponents of the decision in Roe v. Wade 1973 contend that the unwillingness of the Supreme Court to reverse itself on abortion rights illustrates the problem of stare decisis. Another concern that some critics of stare decisis raise is that the doctrine may be applied inconsistently, with justices choosing which precedents to maintain and which to overturn, based on their own ideological beliefs. Some detractors even go so far as to argue that the doctrine should be abandoned altogether, as it interferes with a judge's ability to determine objectively what the law is. Its defenders, however, point out that stare decisis is a guiding principle, not an absolute mandate, and that many Supreme Court precedents later determined to have been decided wrongly, such as Plessy v. Ferguson, have been overturned on sound legal grounds rather than for philosophical or ideological reasons. Another key feature of precedent is that lower courts are bound by the decisions of higher courts. Accordingly, Supreme Court decisions are considered binding precedent, and the judges who preside over other federal courts have to follow them. This aspect of precedent is generally considered non-controversial, though the staunchest critics of stare decisis might argue that it further entrenches wrongly decided precedent into the legal system. Either way, this principle demonstrates the scope of the Supreme Court's authority over the judicial branch.